Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter.
Business columnist and editor Greg Jefferson.
You need to get that nailed down.
I struggle with it so much.
Yeah, that'll work. But this week we're joined by a special guest. I think you've been on once before. It's been a while though, and T.J. Mays is a local attorney. He's the chairman of the Bexar County Opioid Task Force. The only person, I think it's safe to say, the only person who served as chief of staff for both our county judge and our current mayor. TJ, thank you so much.
Excited to be back. Thank you for having me.
Now, I can't help but I think part of the reason I've noticed this is because I was on with you one time, but you've been filling in a lot lately on KLRN's weekly talk show On the Record. Mm-hmm. And so, how have you been enjoying doing that?
It's been a lot of fun. I was able to guest host 2 episodes, and one was actually with the CDC Deputy Director, Jennifer McQuiston. So we had to do an interview, and then the first positive case came out, so we had to re-interview it before it aired.
Oh, my God.
Because it would have been a little delayed there. It wouldn't have worked out too well. So it was neat to visit with her. I love the Reporters Roundtable, of course, because you get to just shoot the bull about stuff that we all enjoy talking about. And it's been a real treat to do that. I think public affairs television programming is very important to engage the audience in the issues that matter, and especially at the local level. So it's a lot of fun.
So we tried to discourage new entrants into the communications business just for obvious reasons. But how did you get involved? Like, why did they call on you?
I was a guest on the show talking about opioids and the task force and the syringe exchange initiative and maybe another vaping, I think, youth vaping. And so I was asked to guest host after Jim announced his retirement and was pleased to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've been interviewed a lot over the years, but I'm not sure if you had done much interviewing yourself. I mean, what is that? Was it kind of a weird process, kind of getting used to being on the other side of that?
Made me appreciate how hard y'all's job can be sometimes, especially if you're dealing with an issue that, it's a matter of first impression for me. I don't know anything about it. So having to come up with interview questions that are informative to a general audience has been a challenge. So it is harder being on the other side of the chair than I thought it would be.
I'm guessing we're going to hear something soon from KLRN about their decision when it comes to like having a permanent host of the show. Would you be open to doing it if that...
That would be a great opportunity, and I'm hopeful about it for sure.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the opioid task force because this is something you've been really involved in. And I think last month the Commissioner's Court had a discussion about this new program, which is the medication assisted treatment program, which is an attempt, I guess, to deal with the issue of people who are incarcerated and dealing with their addiction issues. Can you talk a little bit about this and why you think this is really important?
Absolutely. So a lot of people with substance use issues end up incarcerated. It's a really high number. Something like 65% of the jail population at a given time has a substance use issue. And one thing I've learned getting involved with this opioid issue over the years is that the time when someone's most vulnerable to an overdose from an opiate is within 1 month after leaving incarceration. So that's a time where people are very vulnerable, and we wanted to sort of figure out a way to get our arms around that. There are kind of a few ways that people can, popular parlance is sober up. So one is sort of the 12-step program, abstinence only. But I think there's an emerging recognition in opioids that medication-assisted treatment is an option that works for people. And in San Antonio, we've had this kind of interest in methadone. Judge Wolf, I think, introduced the first methadone bill in the Texas House in the early 70s. And so we're familiar with methadone, but there are other treatments available. One is called buprenorphine, and another is called Vivitrol. So we've been talking about this kind of vaguely for a while, and I actually got a chance. The federal government has given Bexar County some grants on the opioid task force. Got a chance to fly to Philadelphia and tour their jail, where they sort of have a best-in-class program for medication-assisted treatment in the jail. Every day, 400 inmates in Philadelphia get medication-assisted treatment. And so that was in September, and came back and said we gotta get a program going, at least a pilot program. So what we took to Commissioner's Court was a pilot program. The sheriff was supportive, Judge Wolf was supportive, Commissioner Rodriguez, especially with his interest in mental health issues, was very supportive. They all were supportive. So we're hoping that program will be up and running here in a couple months. But it's been great to see so much political buy-in to the idea of medication-assisted treatment in detention settings, because that wasn't on the agenda 3 years ago,
Right.
and now there's broad support for it.
So as far as the implementation of it, you'd have like caseworkers or case managers kind of going and checking on patients and seeing.
Right, and so we've all been reading the reporting about the jail and some of the the issues in the jail, and so this program would be administered by the department. It's called the Office of Criminal Justice Policy and Programs. It's run by Mike Lazito, and he's an employee of Bexar County that reports up through David Smith to Judge Wolf. So it would be administered by that part of the county, and so we're excited about it. We hope that we can prove up the concept so we can kind of expand the pilot program moving forward.
It seems like the jail's got a number of administrative problems, and this seems like it would be adding another layer to it. I mean,
So
we
we definitely got that feedback, which is why we decided to house it in this particular department and have them run the lead.
Right. But do you trust that like the jail administrator would be able to coordinate well? I mean, it just seems like, again, there have been a number of problems, and coordination, with this other department might be a problem.
So that's why we chose to use Vivitrol as the one medication-assisted treatment that we're using. There are 3 forms of medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorder that are approved by the FDA. Vivitrol is the one where it's a monthly shot rather than a daily pill. And one of the reasons that there was a decision made to pursue Vivitrol was that the administrative burden would have been decreased, and not as many personnel involved, and all the other administrative issues that you deal with.
Now, the Bexar County has been part of a group that filed suit against the big opioid manufacturers, and I think a few months back the county withdrew from that group and kind of decided to go alone. What's the status of that lawsuit now?
So Bexar County is set for trial in January. Bexar County and Dallas County both have a trial in January in state court against the pharmaceutical companies in the opioid litigation. There are not that many entities out of the 2,500 or so that have filed suit who actually have a trial setting. So my job right now in my firm is spending all of its time, it's an all-hands-on-deck effort to review millions of pages of documents. Those are Bexar County documents and pharmaceutical company documents to prepare for depositions and then ultimately trial in January. On top of that, there is a group of attorneys general who's trying to kind of create a global settlement, much like they did in the tobacco litigation. So there's a lot of intergovernmental kind of conflict about who should be in the driver's seat, where should the money go, and that won't surprise any of you who follow government. So we're just excited to have a trial setting. We're excited to be moving forward, and I think it'll be a great opportunity to showcase the public health response here in Bexar County, but also to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable for what they did.
What are the chances that it actually makes it to trial? I mean, is there likely to be a settlement?
So I don't know. What I can say is that there were 2 counties in Ohio who had a federal trial setting. This is a few months ago. And 8 hours before opening argument, so that's midnight the night before, there was like a $300 million settlement. So, and both of those counties together, combined population is less than Bexar County's population. So the trial setting is an important thing to have.
Just a little bit of leverage on top of everything else, yeah.
That's the hope, yeah.
Something that fascinates me with the opioid crisis, in particularly in Texas, is that, a couple of years ago, the state gave this $10 million grant to McKesson, and then the next year turned around and started investigating it, looking into its role in perpetuating the opioid crisis. Do you think the state should be in the business of subsidizing pharmaceutical companies at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, I've had a lot of kind of internal dilemma about this myself because, we're going to need the pharmaceutical companies to help us create therapies for emerging public health emergencies like those that have been reported on, especially here lately. And they're also great drivers of economic development. I think that they should be held accountable for what they did that was wrong, but that we should also hope that if they're going to engage in good business practices, help save lives in a way that doesn't gouge people, that they could do so in the state of Texas.
Now, one of the things that you've been, I think, involved in, I think you did an op-ed not too long ago, was the issue of vaping, and you basically called for like a citywide effort to deal with it. And I was interested in I think you made reference to the fact that 1 million high school students from 2017 to 2018 got introduced to it, and I guess one of the thoughts is that with the introduction of flavored options that's it's just become, because the numbers seem to be going down, then they started going up dramatically. When you look at how the city should approach this, I mean, what kind of effort would you like to see?
So if you talk to the school districts, they'll all tell you it's a huge problem. Yeah. There hasn't been a whole lot of interest at City Hall in addressing it. I know Metro Health has done some PSAs and stuff, but I view it as something that we need to get on top of because, again, in 1 year you saw a growth of 1 million people under the age of 18 who started vaping. But there has been some good news, some positive developments. San Antonio was, I think, the first in Texas to do the Tobacco 21 ordinance, which extended to vaping. And then President Trump signed the National Tobacco 21 law, which was helpful. And then they've banned flavors for these pod devices, which are popular with the Juul products. And they think that that'll be a positive step.
Well, wasn't Trump talking for a while about banning, these flavored options? I mean, just completely, and then I think he backed away from that, right? I mean, would you like to see some kind of federal action, or is that too extreme?
Well, tobacco control policy, bipartisan over the past 50 years has been, they come out wanting to be really strong, and then they get pushback from the industry and from activists within their party. So, I mean, I think that his approach was pretty consistent with what you see in the administration on this. So now you can't buy, my understanding is you can't buy flavors for the pods that are popular with the teens, but you can for the cartridges. That's my understanding, but I could be wrong. Those big, they look like a cell phone almost, vape things. So we'll see how it goes. I will say that once everybody started getting interested in Juul's marketing tactics and started cracking down on youth vaping sales, their market value went down by something like 50 to 66%, which it seems to me would prove that their business strategy was to get an entire generation addicted to nicotine. And when they're taking out full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal every single day saying, we don't sell to teens, me think Hamlet doth protest a bit too much.
This is the thing that I always struggle with when it comes with tobacco and now with vaping, is that you have the country's been kind of schizophrenic about how it's dealt with tobacco, for example, since the 1964 Surgeon General report, which was, it's terrible, it's really damaging, but we don't want to ban it. And that but we don't want people advertising. And then when we find out that they're marketing to a certain group, they're marketing maybe to a particular minority group or to young people, we're like, well, this is really horrible. But pretty much any company that has a product, in order for them to survive, they want to reach more people and they want to reach the next generation, or everybody, their consumers are all going to pass away, and there won't be a base there. So they're basically doing what any business would do. But we kind of get really angry with them for doing that. At the same time, we let them continue to exist, and so that's what I kind of struggle with. I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I was just kind of curious.
The FDA was asleep at the switch on this, and that was a big failure on their part. And I know Scott Gottlieb, who was the commissioner for a while, tried to get aggressive, and he ended up being run out by the tobacco industry friends in Congress. So it was a breakdown, regulatory breakdown, in my opinion.
Well, maybe you can help me out with. I've not understood why you had the flavored pod ban, but not the rest of the cartridges. I mean, you have only one portion of the market being affected by that. What was behind that?
The rationale behind that was that youth favor the pod, not the cartridges. So if you're trying to get on top of the youth, and so I mean, I don't know how I feel about it. I think we need more money going into prevention. There was a bill that was introduced in the last legislative session They got a little bit of traction that would have levied an excise tax, which I think should have gone to prevention. But
And how much of it is just like an educational effort? I think that's something you've talked about, because it seemed like when vaping sort of became a thing, that I heard people talking about it as, well, this is like a safer alternative to smoking. I think that there was kind of this sort of false narrative that was put out there that I'm sure that you're having to combat to some degree, even now, even as we get more information and more stories
Right.
about it. There's still this sort of false perception that it's somehow it's safer.
and I don't know whether it's safer or not. It doesn't. I mean, it makes sense to me that it would be, but I don't know. I do know that Great Britain, for example, has had a lot of success using vaping as a tobacco cessation tool without having the surge in youth vaping. So
Interesting.
that's why I think it was sort of a policy regulatory breakdown here domestically. It's my personal opinion. I think we need more prevention education for substance use generally in schools, and that's not a sexy thing to fund. But the Truce campaign, the late '90s, early 2000s worked. We saw dramatic decreases in teen smoking over that period of time, and so we have a model for it out there.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the coronavirus issue, which is we're seeing that the numbers continue to rise, and internationally, of course, this is a huge issue, and particularly kind of get your take on this, because we've seen both Mayor Nirenberg and County Judge Nelson Wolff. They've been really prominent players in this over the past week, and you know them very well. I mean, recently we saw San Antonio had taken in more than 200 people to be quarantined at Joint Base San Antonio Lackland. There was the incident last week where you had one person who was tested twice. They had coronavirus, then they had subsequently been tested twice. They were negative, and then they were pending results on a third test. When the person was released, they went to North Star Mall, ate at the food court, and so on. And we later got the information that that person had tested positive. And so Judge Wolff and Mayor Nirenberg were really upset about this, I think understandably. And so you saw this kind of tug of war between them and federal authorities last week. That we had the declaration of a health emergency, and we tried to get a temporary injunction to basically require that no one be released from Lackland unless there was, I guess, at least a third test. Now we're getting news, and listeners will know more about this than we do, because things are happening fast with this. But at some point soon, we're going to have 100 more people coming in from the Grand Princess cruise ship, which had been docked off the coast of California, and they're going to be quarantined there. So when you look at the way Judge Wolff and Mayor Nirenberg have tried to kind of deal with this, to protect this community while dealing with federal authorities who ultimately have the power in this situation, I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, so first of all, in my family, there's the coronavirus response expert, and it's my wife who's been dealing with this 24/7 for a month now. So I don't want to step too far out of line here, but I think that Mayor Nirenberg and Judge Wolff have been great in their response. They've shown really strong leadership, in my opinion. I know that there's been some pushback from the declarations saying that it's impacted the tourism industry and other economic development activities, which is understandable. But we also had a situation where you didn't want the federal government releasing a bunch of people into our community, given the federal government's track record here with the coronavirus, and so I can't really speak to it more than that, other than to say I think that they've both been really strong. It's a difficult situation because you have a federal government that has kind of an interesting administrative style compared to past federal governments, and then that's
Probably
the most
one way of
polite way to
putting
put
it.
it.
Yeah, right.
and then you have local leaders who are just really don't want the virus coming into their community. So I'm really happy with the way they've handled it personally.
I mean, did you see the declarations as Wolff and Nirenberg just trying to get leverage over CDC? I mean, it didn't seem to work out. But, I mean, you got to credit them, I think, for the effort.
Yeah, and I mean, my recollection is, and again, it's kind of a foggy scenario in our household about this. But my recollection is that the folks left after those declarations, like they were flown out of town, and so I don't know what their intention was. I do know that it was risky to do it, and I'm glad they did because we don't want people walking around our community. with
Yeah,
corona.
and one of the things, and talking about the Trump administration's administrative style, Congressman Joaquin Castro last week, I was talking with him, and he was saying, that when that first group of people was sent to Lackland, I mean, I think he basically found out about it through the news. He had not been informed at all, and I think he actually had a very tense conversation with the people at CDC because he's felt, he's getting constituents who are asking him what's going on, and this is something in his district, and he didn't know anything about it. And so I think one of the challenges with this whole situation is there's been a lot of maybe not contradictory communication, but sort of it hasn't been as coordinated as maybe we would like. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I saw a tweet today. I think it was a headline of a New York Times op-ed that says, "You can't gaslight a virus." and I think
If you could, Trump would try, I think. But,
yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of been the case. When I was interviewing Dr. McQuiston from the CDC, I asked, why was San Antonio chosen?
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of said that was a decision made way higher up in government. I don't know. So we have a pretty robust medical community here,
Yeah.
and so it's been a challenge.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but one of the things that the mayor referred to last week was the issue of Fiesta, which people are starting to wonder about because I think he did it on Friday in response to Austin's announcement that South by Southwest is going to be canceled, which I think is the first time in 34 years that that's happened, and so it's going to have a major impact on the city of Austin. And Fiesta is obviously the biggest sort of event that we have in annually in San Antonio, and people are wondering about it. And we're a few weeks away. Do you have any thoughts on? Everything's changing, obviously,
Right. It's a
from
fluid
day to day.
situation.
But what do you?
So I think that what differentiates South by Southwest from Fiesta is South by Southwest has a lot of sponsors who are from other communities. So you have big Silicon Valley companies saying we're canceling our participation in South by Southwest. Fiesta is a little bit more community driven than that, to say the least. So I know they'll make the right decision about Fiesta, but we don't know what the world's going to look like in a month.
Yeah, I mean, we've had there's been talk about NBA games being held with no audience at all.
Yeah,
just for to empty arenas, which I think LeBron
Yeah.
James is saying, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, it's like a funhouse mirror version of the world for them, I'm sure. I don't know. I posted something on Instagram. I said, keep calm, carry on, and wash your hands, and just take proper preventative measures and hope for the best. That's sort of my philosophy on it.
I wanted to get a chance to talk to you a little bit about climate change because I know it's another issue that you've been really involved in. And right now, I mean, it's obviously playing out in the presidential race. We've had candidates, I think particularly Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side, talking about the Green New Deal. We've had, I think, on the side of the administration and many Republicans, we've seen kind of an unwillingness to really maybe to take any action or to view any action as damaging to the economy and something that they don't want to look at. It seems like you're kind of trying to find some kind of like middle ground where we can kind of address it, but at the same time, sort of be mindful of the economic impact of it.
Yeah, and I mean the problem with climate change, from my perspective, is that the reduction in coal emissions from the United States over the past 15 years has been more than offset by an increase in coal-driven emissions from India and China and other emerging economies. So there's only so much you can do to affect sort of the macro climate change conversation. And I wrote a piece in the Express News a couple months ago where I sort of said, let's focus on mitigation. Because if it is going to be a fact of life, and no one has given me any confidence that it's not going to be a fact of life for us in the next decade or two, then maybe we should focus on investments that would help us address it, remediate it, and mitigate it in our communities. So, an example, the River Authority decided not to move forward with a discussion about this taxing authority they have to build some infrastructure that would help with stormwater runoff and everything. I mean, I feel pretty confident that a big storm is coming to San Antonio in the next decade, and that it would behoove us to have improved flood control infrastructure for that. And so I was disappointed that we couldn't even have that conversation as a community. That is kind of one climate change mitigation discussion that's occurred. We keep talking about the aquifer. Josh, I've been reading your pieces about that. I think that's part of the equation. I'm happy to discuss it further for sure.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, one of the big issues in our community in the last few months has been how we get more funding for public transit, and the city has looked at some different approaches. And I think for a while there was talk about San Antonio Water System taking on the responsibility of the Aquifer Protection Program, which would free up some sales tax revenue, possibly for transit. I think now they're talking about taking some of the revenue that the city collects from SAWS and using that to fund the program. Are you comfortable with that? I mean, I think we're talking about less money than has gone into it historically. Is that right?
Yeah, it's about half of the current dollars that they get. So, I mean, where do you kind of land on that?
So just for context, I spent every week for a year and a half of my life when I was working in the District 8 office, meeting with the group of activists who tried to get it reauthorized successfully in 2015. That was from 2013 to 2015.
And Mayor Nirenberg, as a council member, was one of the people I think really pushing
I was there on his orders
to do that.
Yeah, he was a big public advocate for it. And my sense at the time was that was probably going to be the last rodeo in terms of the sales tax, just because there was so much pressure politically for more money for transit, because I mean it's almost tried to say the truth, which is that we do have the most underfunded transit agency.
Well, Ray Saldana, who has been the board chair for VIA and is leaving San Antonio to go to the Washington D.C. area, but I think he talked about the fact that during that last process around 2015 that I think he was actually advocating that that money go to public transit.
Yeah, and to VIA's credit and to sort of that group of activists' credits, they got organized around that 1/8 of a cent sales tax way earlier for this round than they did for the last round. So they started talking about it in 2017, knowing that a 2020 vote was coming up. In terms of answering your question about the aquifer, we've protected 160,000 acres, give or take, I believe. And you never want to say we shouldn't protect any more, but there are other community priorities. Diego Bernal has been talking about how transit is a poverty reduction measure. When you look at transit as on its effect on healthcare, a social determinant of health, so there's a bigger picture there. So I was a big supporter of the Aquifer Protection Program, going to the 8 cent in 2015, and am also kind of supportive of what Mayor Nirenberg's trying to do in terms of addressing the aquifer challenge and the transit challenge, which I think is pretty bold on his part.
I mean, do you think this is kind of like the defining issue? If you look at his tenure as mayor, and he's going into another election cycle next year, that the ability, because this is a challenging situation, to try to convince people that we do have these public transit needs, and some people are kind of skeptical about whether they think we're just kind of throwing good money after bad. I don't see it that way myself, but I know that is one school of thought. His ability to navigate this issue and get more funding for public transit, while also I think satisfying concerns that people might have about aquifer protection. I mean, would you see that as kind of like the defining?
Absolutely, and ever since his election, I thought it was going to be his defining challenge. I mean, and they're coming up with a game plan. I don't know if it'll work. I think it might. I was here last June, and Greg asked me, TJ, Ron's been a lot weaker than we would have expected, and I remember,
that does sound familiar.
I just listened to it, so and so he, I will say that I believe he is stronger now than he's been in 2 years. 2018 was a rough year. 2019, that re-election campaign was more difficult than a lot of people thought it should have been.
Right.
But when you look at the fire union, I mean, all's well that ends well. So it was kind of a. I like to say that politics is like jazz music, and sometimes it goes ways you don't expect it to go. But all's well that ends well. And on the fire union, it looks like he's going to come to some sort of a consensus on the aquifer piece. So and then if pre-K passes, which I think people expect it will, he'll have some points on the board and some momentum. And I think personally he's stronger now than he's been in 2 years.
Do you think he's set up? Maybe he aired a bit and setting up essentially, like he says that, it's not aquifer versus transit, it's aquifer and transit. But do you think he's actually, created that argument, or do you think he's pinned the two against, or pitted the two against each other?
So I don't think he's pitted the two against each other. I think other interests in the conversation have pitted the two against each other. But, he's always sort of said, I want to have both, and I want to come up with some kind of a solution that has both. And I think he's there. I mean, it is less money for aquifer protection, but it's better than nothing,
And then we have the third argument, which is, just take it out of pre-K for SA, which is
The Lyle Larson argument.
the Lyle Larson argument.
Yeah, and I'll tell y'all, I've seen some polling on this, and that's not a citywide consensus
I don't
around
think
that
that's
idea.
going to happen. Well, I think on that note, we're going to wrap things up. TJ, thank you so much for joining us again. Good luck with On the Record, and so we're looking forward to watching as you host. You planning on doing it this week?
Not this week, no. I'm taking the week off, but
Okay.
maybe in the future.
Okay. Well, good luck with that. And all of you listening, thanks, and we'll catch up with you next week. Take care.
Thank you.